They thought she was just another quiet woman out of place. They were wrong. It happened in Hangar 7, under the glare of flickering fluorescent lights and the judgment of 200 eyes. The air was thick with the buzz of machinery, clipped commands, and the low hum of egos. Standing in the center of it all was Eleanor Grant, 52 years old, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, dressed in a worn standard-issue flight uniform that seemed decades too late. She looked plain, forgettable even, which was exactly what Colonel Mason Harrison had counted on. "Get her a pink beret while you're at it," he sneered, lifting his boot and grinding it over the insignia she'd just placed on the floor. The laughter was sharp and cruel. A few students even smirked, as if it were a comedy show instead of an elite aviation training program. "You want to pretend to be a soldier?" Harrison barked, circling her like a predator. "You think they lowered the standards just so you could cosplay your glory days?" Eleanor didn't speak. She simply reached up, unfastened her silver flight wings, and placed them neatly beside the trampled insignia. Then, slowly, she pulled down the collar of her uniform just enough to reveal a faint, inked dagger entwined with wings at the base of her neck. A few people blinked, one instructor visibly stiffened. Someone had recognized the tattoo. Without a word, Eleanor turned toward the exit. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said evenly. "Observation deck." That was it. No argument, no drama, just silence. And somehow, that was worse than shouting. Most had no idea who she was. To them, she was just Eleanor Grant, a late-entry candidate from Arizona, joining a military-to-civilian pilot exchange program at an age when most people were counting down to retirement. Her record said she'd logged 500 hours in a Cessna 172. That was it. A schoolteacher with a soft voice and an outdated phone. The kind of woman you never looked at twice. Back in Phoenix, she lived in Unit 2B of a modest stucco apartment building with faded numbers on the door. She taught math at a local high school algebra, mostly. Never raised her voice. Never missed a day. Her students called her Miss Grant and knew her as the one who sometimes hummed to herself while writing equations. But there were details. Always there were details. Every morning at 5:30, Eleanor ran 10 miles through the quietest streets, not the scenic trails, not the jogger-packed sidewalks. She avoided eye contact, never wore headphones, and carried a rhythm like she was chasing something only she could see. Her apartment was sterile, clean, unusually precise. White walls, sparse furniture, a single bookshelf filled with math books and old aviation manuals. On the counter, a faded photo of a fighter jet caught in the fire-red light of a sunset blurred, distant. You wouldn't know it was hers unless you looked closer. She owned no social media, carried a flip phone that barely texted, and politely declined every invitation to staff parties or Friday happy hours. Eventually, people stopped asking. Principal Lawrence once joked, "Ellie, you're the most reliable ghost I've ever hired." He wasn't far off. Because ghosts, after all, come from somewhere. 10 years ago, Eleanor Grant wasn't teaching math. She was flying at 40,000 feet where oxygen thins and death rides your 6 o'clock WO. She was the youngest pilot to ever qualify on the F-22 Raptor. Her call sign, Spectre, because she didn't appear on radar. Because she could slip behind enemy jets like a whisper and disappear again without a trace. She was the legend you heard about, but never met. Until she vanished. There had been a mission classified, messy, and politically dangerous. The details were scrubbed from every official system, but whispers carried truth. 3 Russian MiGs downed in 90 seconds. A chemical weapons depot left standing. A strategic decision made under fire that cost her everything. The official story? Deviation from flight plan. Unofficially? Sabotage. Colonel Derek Coleman, now operating under the new name Mason Harrison, had been her superior then. He'd sent her into a kill zone, whether by incompetence or design, no one could prove, not before. Not until now. Her younger brother, Captain Jonah Grant, had taken her place in a later operation after Eleanor was deemed unstable. Jonah died 17 minutes in. The report said, mechanical failure. Eleanor knew better. She buried Jonah with a folded flag and a vow she never spoke aloud. Then she vanished from every radar, leaving behind nothing but a sealed personnel file and legends too wild to print. For 10 years, she lived in silence. Hiding? Maybe. Healing? Definitely. Teaching math to students who didn't know they were learning from a combat-tested warfighter. Smiling politely while teenagers groaned about quadratic equations. never once knowing their teacher could outfly any jet in the sky, and she might have stayed hidden forever, until she saw a notice. A special civilian to military flight program, open applications, a chance to train with active personnel at Edwards Air Force Base. She almost threw the flyer away. But then she saw the signature. Commanding Officer, Colonel Mason Harrison. Her hands didn't tremble, but her heart shifted. The man who had killed her brother, was back in uniform, and now he was overseeing the very system he once poisoned. That night, Eleanor filled out the application in block-perfect penmanship. She wrote, 500 hours Cessna 172. She did not mention the 10,000-plus hours logged in aircraft that never officially existed, or the Distinguished Flying Cross, or the mission over Iran that earned her a Purple Heart. Number? She didn't come to brag. She came to bury a go-stand, perhaps, remind the world that some wings can't be stripped away. Tomorrow, they'd see her on the observation deck. And this time, she wouldn't be walking away. The next morning, Hangar 7 was buzzing well before dawn. They said Eleanor wouldn't show up, that she'd quietly pack her things and disappear again, tail between her legs. But when the instructors arrived at the observation deck, there she was, standing at the far edge, looking out across the tarmac, coffee in hand, posture steady, calm as morning fog. She didn't greet anyone, didn't smile, just nodded once to the junior airman who offered her a clipboard, then turned her eyes skyward, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. It unnerved them more than any outburst ever could. By week 3, they were trying harder to shake her. Simulators mysteriously failed during her sessions flight controls, locking mid-maneuver, nav systems blinking out without warning. No one else's profiles glitched like that. One tech whispered that someone had tampered with her SIM files after hours. I'd report it, he mumbled, but the chain of command, well, you know. Locker emptied, parking spot blocked with cones. Her printed flight plans vanished, reappeared with alterations. None of it broke her. Eleanor never raised her voice, never filed complaints. She simply recalculated, adjusted, adapted, quiet as a ghost. And yet, she started drawing attention. During a systems class, Major Lewis, a smug instructor with a disdain for legacy applicants, called on her, clearly expecting failure. Miss Grant, he said sharply, explain the flight control redundancy in the F-16's fly-by-wire system and how it differs from the F-35. She stood. No notes, no hesitation. 15 minutes later, she delivered a dissertation worthy of the Air Force Academy covering failure probabilities, layered redundancy architecture, and logic voting algorithms. She even corrected a typo in the instructional slide. The room went silent. Lewis coughed. Textbook knowledge, he muttered, doesn't mean anything in real-world combat. But eyes had started turning, whispering. She wasn't just another older applicant, she was something else. Bradley Thompson didn't like that. Brad, the golden boy of the class, son of a senator, and heir to a corporate aviation empire, had installed himself as alpha on day 1. He had the best gear, the best scores, the best connections, and he wanted Eleanor out. He'd cornered one of the other female candidates, Jennifer Adams, a sharp, confident former airline pilot, and said just loud enough for others to overhear, "You've got real talent, Jennifer. Shame to see it dragged down by someone clinging to glory days. My father sits on the aviation committee, you know. He remembers talent and those who disappoint." Within days, Jennifer stopped sitting near Eleanor, stopped meeting her eyes in the hallway. Maria, the Coast Guard transfer, and Lisa, the aerospace engineer, followed suit. Sisterhood collapsed under the pressure of ambition and fear. By week 6, Eleanor was utterly alone. Except, not quite. 3 other cadets barely competent, often overlooked, started hovering near her during training. They didn't say much, but during flight simulations, they flew better when she led. They calmed. Their formations tightened. Their voices over the comms became steadier. One afternoon, as she debriefed with them, a quiet voice spoke. "Ma'am," one said, How do you do that?" Eleanor looked at him. "Do what?" "Make it feel like we can actually fly." She considered the question. "Because you can. I'm not teaching you to fly like me. I'm helping you hear the sky." They didn't fully understand, but they followed her anyway. That's when the pressure increased. Harrison began calling her out in front of the class. "Your flight plan is clean," he said once, voice mocking, "but it shows no tactical awareness, We're not flying sightseeing tours, Miss Grant. This is military aviation. We need warriors, not calculators. Another time, after a flawless simulator dogfight, he questioned the software. No one with your background should outperform seasoned trainees. The sim must be off. We'll rerun it with corrected parameters. Still, she said nothing, just recalibrated and flew again, and again, and again, until even the doubters ran out of excuses. Then came the turning point. Week 12. Formation Flight Evaluations. She was assigned to lead a 4-ship formation with the weakest 3 pilots in the entire program. It was supposed to be a quiet humiliation, a controlled failure. Thompson, meanwhile, was handed the best flyers in the class. "When you wash out," he called over his shoulder, "maybe I'll put in a good word for you at my dad's commuter airline." Eleanor just strapped in, checked her headset, and closed her eyes. And something shifted. It wasn't rage, it wasn't nerves. It was something older, colder, like ice water running in her blood, that crystalline calm that only came when the sky whispered, "Now." As her team taxied out, the others watched, waiting for a disaster. But what they saw was impossible. Her flight, those 3 struggling novices moved as one. Tight formation, perfect lines, maneuvers that looked rehearsed down to the inch. No stutters, no radio panics, just pure fluid coordination. And when Thompson's team tried to intercept, Eleanor used their aggression against them. She repositioned defensively without breaking formation, forcing Thompson into an overtake pattern that made him look clumsy. The debriefing tape was played on loop. Even the crustiest instructors were stunned. "Must be a glitch," Harrison grunted. "We'll rerun it tomorrow." They did. The second time was cleaner, tighter, better. By the third run, her wingmen were laughing in the comms. "Ma'am, that barrel roll, was that a trap? Did we just bait him?" She didn't gloat. She didn't boast. She just said, "You executed. That's all that matters." Even Thompson's elite wingmen started sneaking glances. One even whispered during the break, "How the hell is she doing this?" But Harrison wasn't backing down. Not yet. He called for a full squadron simulation. Combat scenario, Team Grant versus Team Thompson. Live debrief to be presented to the entire faculty. Unofficially, it was a setup. Officially, it would be her final evaluation. And everyone knew it. What no one realized, except perhaps the quiet woman they underestimated, was that Eleanor Grant had been planning for this exact moment since the day she signed her application. The hangar was silent. Colonel Harrison stood at the center like a prosecutor in a trial, his voice cutting through the stale air like a scalpel. On the massive briefing screen behind him, Eleanor Grant, removed. He'd prepared this moment with bureaucratic precision. Her sim scores were statistically improbable. Her background check showed gaps. Her behavior, divisive. She stood alone under the industrial lighting, surrounded by cadets, instructors, and staff all positioned in a perfect circle around her. Like a ritual, like a public execution. "The military," Harrison declared, "is built on trust. How can we trust someone who won't integrate, who hides behind silence and manipulation?" He gestured toward Thompson and the other top performers, clean-cut, sharp uniforms, glowing evaluations. "These are the future of military aviation. Team players, professionals. Miss Grant, on the other hand, is a cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance outweighs humility. When someone forgets this is about mission, not ego." He turned to her then, voice dropping into a low growl. "You have 2 options. Remove your uniform, walk away with what's left of your dignity, or I'll have you escorted out stripped of credentials and publicly discredited." He smiled like it was a mercy. Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked at him not with fear, not with rage but with something colder, measured. She slowly removed her flight jacket, unpinned her name tag, and set both gently on the concrete floor. And then, without a word, she walked away. No one stopped her. No one spoke. But the silence felt wrong, like the sky before a storm. That night, she sat alone in her small apartment, lights off. In her lap, a wooden box she'd kept sealed for a decade. She opened it carefully, unwrapping ribbons, medals, and old service patches. At the bottom, a letter, worn at the creases. "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong." Her brother's handwriting. He had written it before his final mission, before the Black Hawk crash, before she'd buried him and disappeared. She read every word slowly, as if hearing his voice again. "You taught me how to fly, Ellie. Long before the cockpit, you taught me what courage really means. If they ever come for you again, don't just survive, remind them who you are." Under the letter, a sealed envelope. On the front, "Open only in case of emergency." Inside was a phone number and a signature, General Nathaniel Roberts, the man who'd once called her the best pilot of her generation. Her hands didn't shake as she dialed. The voice on the other end picked up after the first ring, older, gravelly, but instantly familiar. "Ellie?" he said. "Sir?" she replied. "It's Spectre. I need a favor." There was a long pause. Then laughter, deep, warm, knowing. "I've waited 10 years for this call. I need something dramatic, something they can't explain away." "How do you feel about French engineering?" Roberts asked. "What?" "There's a Dassault Rafale on loan for Allied training, fully fueled, sitting on a ramp at Nellis. Pilot Dubois just developed a sudden family emergency." "Sir," she warned, "that's an active combat platform. The implications." "Eleanor," he interrupted gently, "do you think Coleman is the only one who's played politics? I've got a dozen senators and the Secretary of the Air Force watching him, but they need a spark, something undeniable." "A statement," she said softly. "Exactly. You, flying a frontline fighter jet over the program he controls after he publicly declared you unfit to fly? That ends careers." The next morning, dawn spilled across the Mojave in streaks of gold and violet. Eleanor didn't drive her old Civic. She took a cab. She wore no uniform, just a plain black flight suit, no patches, no rank, no name. The kind test pilots used when flying aircraft that didn't exist. At Nellis, the crew chief greeted her with a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said with respect in his eyes, "she's fueled and ready, training loadout only, weather's calm, and General Roberts sends his regards." The Dassault Rafale sat like a panther on the tarmac sleek, deadly, silent. Eleanor ran her hands along its body, feeling the contours, the weight, the power. It had been years since she sat in a cockpit. But flying? That was written in her blood. As she climbed in, the muscle memory returned like a song she'd once known by heart. The switches, the gauges, the whisper of turbines spooling to life. At exactly 0800, back at Edwards, Colonel Harrison stood before the class. He began another speech, something about standards, integrity, the importance of emotional stability in high-stress environments. Thompson and his friends stood tall in the front row. The 3 novice cadets Eleanor had mentored huddled in the back, frustrated, humiliated, confused. Then the hangar shook. Windows rattled. An unholy crack tore across the sky. Everyone turned toward the massive open doors, just in time to see it slicing low across the runway at knife-edge angle. A Dassault Rafale, painted in French Air Force colors, flying at 500 feet, canopy low enough for the pilot to be visible. The aircraft pulled vertical climbing like a rocket, then twisted mid-air in a maneuver so violent it should have broken the frame. Gasps. Phones came out. Harrison screamed into a radio, "Tower! We have an unauthorized incursion! Scramble the alert!" The hangar PA crackled. "Edwards Tower to all personnel. Allied demonstration in progress. Repeat, this flight is authorized." Then the voice came over the loudspeakers. "Clear, calm, professional. Edwards Tower, this is Ghost Zero. Request permission for tactical demonstration." The instructors froze. That call sign hadn't been heard in 10 years. Ghost. It couldn't be. The tower responded, voice trembling with suppressed awe. "Ghost Zero, you are cleared for unrestricted demonstration. Airspace is yours." Harrison turned ghost white. The Rafale returned, this time inverted sailing just 200 feet above the hangar. For a moment, Eleanor's helmeted face was visible through the glass, looking directly down at them. Then she climbed again. Over the next 20 minutes, the jet danced across the sky in ways that made seasoned pilots weep. Cobra maneuvers, flat spins, vertical corkscrews. She even spelled messages in smoke trail-coded signals only elite aviators would recognize. Brad Thompson stood rooted in place, jaw slack. Jennifer Adams pulled out her phone, whispering, "She's not just good, she's a legend. I looked her up last night." And then, finally, the Rafale made a low pass, slow and level. The canopy opened mid-roll, and Eleanor rendered a crisp saluteno to Harrison, not to the crowd but to the memory of those who had been crushed and discarded, like her. And in that moment, no one doubted who she was. Not anymore. The Rafale disappeared into the morning sun. Its roar faded, but the silence in Hangar 7 remained deafening. No one moved. No one dared speak. Even the cockiest cadets stood with heads low, unable to reconcile what they had just witnessed with the woman they had mocked only a day before. Then came the sound of engines. A black SUV convoy rolled onto the flight lane unmarked, quiet, deliberate. From the lead vehicle stepped General Nathaniel Roberts, flanked by federal agents and military police. He walked straight up to Colonel Harrison, no hesitation, no ceremony. "Derek Coleman," he said, voice firm enough to cut steel, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, falsifying mission data, abuse of authority, and contributing to the wrongful death of Captain Jonah Grant." Gasps. Brad Thompson took a visible step back. The agents cuffed Harrison, who was too stunned to resist. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared into nothing, as if reality itself had folded beneath him. General Roberts turned to face the gathered personnel. "For 10 years, he began, "we've built a case against this man, but we needed one more proof of pattern behavior. A final opportunity to show how far he would go to destroy others in the name of preserving his ego." He paused. Lieutenant Colonel Eleanor Grant volunteered to be that proof. Murmurs rippled through the hangar. "Lieutenant Colonel," someone whispered, "she's active. She's Ghost?" "She endured 16 weeks of sabotage, isolation, and harassment," Roberts continued. "She didn't retaliate. She documented. She trained. She lifted others until even the ones meant to fail began to soar. If that's not leadership, I don't know what is." The cadets stared at each other in stunned silence. For many of them, the day would forever split their lives into before and after. A week later, back in Phoenix, Eleanor returned to her routine. 5:30 a.m., 10 miles through the desert streets. Then class, equations, quiet encouragement, no headlines, no medals on her wall, just chalk dust on her hands and a classroom of students who slowly began to realize their teacher wasn't quite like the others. That morning, a familiar voice fell into step beside her halfway through her run. "Colonel Grant?" It was Jennifer Adamsnow in full uniform, jogging hard to keep pace. "I need to apologize," she said, winded but firm. Eleanor didn't slow. "No apology necessary," she replied. "Yes, there is," Jennifer insisted. "I knew what they were doing. I knew it was wrong. I stayed silent because I thought it would protect my career." They jogged a few more paces in silence. "And now?" Eleanor asked softly. Jennifer exhaled. "Now I know. Silence doesn't protect us. It only protects the ones doing the harm." They finished their run together. No words. Just respect. Later that month, in Eleanor's quiet classroom, as she graded papers under soft fluorescent lights, someone knocked. It was General Roberts, this time out of uniform, holding an envelope. He smiled as he sat on a student desk that creaked beneath his weight. "Still grading?" he asked. "Still flying," she replied with a small smile, tapping her pen to a student's margin. "I came to thank you personally," he said. "Not just for Coleman, but for what followed. 15 officers removed, a dozen programs overhauled, an entire generation of young aviators inspired to rethink what leadership means." She said nothing, just listened. He offered her the envelope. "The President wants to award you the Medal of Honor retroactively, for Syria, and for the lives you saved in Afghanistan. Full ceremony, media, the works." Eleanor took the envelope but didn't open it. "With respect, sir, I'll decline." Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Medals are for those who need reminders of what they did. I haven't forgotten." He nodded slowly. "I told them you'd say that." He stood, then paused at the door. "There's another offer. Quiet. Off the record. 2 weeks a year at the Air Force Academy. Help us design new training programs. Not just tactics, ethics, leadership. Your voice could shape the future." Eleanor looked at the whiteboard, at the stack of student test papers, at the photo of her brother quietly resting on the shelf above her desk. "I'll do it," she said. 2 weeks a year, but only if I can keep teaching here." "You've got a deal." He turned to leave but added one last thing. "When you flew that Rafale, you didn't just break Coleman's grip, you reminded an entire generation why we fly." Eleanor nodded. "Not for medals, not for ego." He smiled, "For the joy of defying gravity." The door closed behind him. Weeks passed. At Desert Valley High, her classroom grew from 12 students to over 40. Word had spread, Miss Grant's class is different. She didn't just teach math, she taught how to think, how to rise. One girl wrote on her test, I used to think math was about numbers, but now I think it's about courage. Eleanor wrote back, courage is a formula too, and you've already solved for it. 6 months after the Rafale flight, a dedication ceremony was held at Edwards Air Force Base. A new memorial, for aviators lost not in combat, but to broken systems. Jonah Grant's name was etched in black granite, alongside 17 others. Eleanor attended in civilian clothes, standing at the back, unnoticed. But someone did notice. Jennifer, now Captain Adams, found her quietly afterward. I've been using your teaching method with my cadets, she said, leading by lifting others. It works. Eleanor smiled. It's not revolutionary, it's just human. As they walked toward the parking lot, a nervous young lieutenant approached. Excuse me, she asked, eyes wide. Are you Ghost? Eleanor opened her mouth to deflect, then paused. The girl's eyes weren't asking for autograph or fame. They were asking for permission to believe in herself. I used to be, Eleanor said softly. Now, I'm just a teacher. The young woman's voice trembled. When I saw that video hat you did in the sky, I almost quit. I thought I didn't belong. But you showed me that belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about flying true. Eleanor touched the wings on her chest gently. Then fly true, Lieutenant. And when someone tries to clip your wings, remember, they can take your uniform, your position, even your aircraft, but they can't take the sky from your soul. That evening, as the sun set behind the jagged edges of the Mojave, Eleanor stood on her apartment balcony. A flight of T-38S passed overhead, slicing gold against crimson sky. She thought of Jonah, of all the flights they never took together. And then she smiled. Because some victories don't come from destroying others. They come from choosing to build. Some strength isn't in shouting louder. It's in standing quietly and letting the truth fly free.